Lawrence, you got to take it away. Would you like to give us a little introduction and get started?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's nice to be here. And before I really, get into things, I've got to say, um, I don't like doing this right now because you're all showing me my age at this point. I too was an intern, and I was an intern when cyber insurance actually was just getting started. So that shows you how old I am. No, my name is Larry Baldino. I am the president of cyber and technology here at Dual North America. Duals in underwriting MGA. We underwrite coverage in all 50 states. I'm based in Connecticut. We have operations in Charlotte, North Carolina, Naples, Florida, San Diego, Chicago, Dallas. So we're kind of all over the country. So hopefully at some point, and as you make your way into the insurance business, we can all cross our paths at some point. So today we're going to talk about cyber, and as Daniel said, I'm very, very interactive. I don't generally like a lot with PowerPoints and things like that. So feel free if questions come up as they come up, and if you just heard something on the news and say, "Hey, I wanna ask about it," feel free. I guess I would start off as saying like from an insurance perspective, cyber insurance might seem a little bit odd. It might feel a little bit different than other lines of insurance. I'm here to tell you that, like you've been learning all summer, at the end of the day, cyber is like every other insurance. A claim comes in, claim adjuster is assigned, you get paid for it. So, let's kind of take that off. Like while we cover different things and while the coverage itself is a bit unique, at the end of the day, it's still insurance. So I just want to go for that because that gets lost on a lot of even, people who have been in the insurance business. They feel it's kind of mystical or different. And so what I would say is cyber insurance is a two-part policy form. So first is the first party part. So the first party part is all the expenses related to a data breach. So let's, go back and say, cyber insurance covers any sort of data breach, ransomware attack. You're starting to hear a lot about that. There are certain events like Scattered Spider, for instance, where airlines are being, locked up and insurance companies and healthcare risks. And so this is really the insurance coverage that kind of addresses all those data breaches and ransomware attacks that you might be reading about. So the first party expenses are those that are directly related to a cyber event. So, think about, okay, the risk is breached and you hear about it on the news. Well, behind the scenes, there are things like incident response costs. So, what happened, where, how. Um, uh, there's also forensics. Can we trace it back to where it was originated? Crisis management, how do we deal with it? And then one that you don't often see in the news is kind of the business interruption um, piece of it. Assuming you've gone through some property presentations, you might be familiar with business interruption. Business interruption is basically, if the business is down, what are the costs that are incurred by the business and how are they made whole as a result of the event? In a lot of cases, when a cyber event occurs, you have to take your network off. So that's why if you're watching something about how businesses are losing a lot of revenue and a lot of net worth when a data breach happens, the reason for that is, businesses have to be taken offline. the sales transactions can't happen, but you still have to pay your employees. You still have to turn on the lights every day. And so this coverage kind of addresses those gaps. So those are really like the main first party expense side. And like I said, right now, the largest type of event that's triggering these first party coverages is the ransomware, almost pandemic, I would call it at this point. About roughly roughly 50% of the claims we see in the cyberspace are ransomware related. Does anybody have any questions, or has that topic ever come up for anybody? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, has anyone ever experienced anything with ransomware? Or maybe you've heard of, I'm sure, some of the headlines with some of these companies that have experienced these and maybe potentially exposed your information.
Uh, Hello. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joseph. I'm a student at UNT up here in North
Mhm.
Texas.
Yep.
Um, I do have a friend that works for Kettering, and I know recently they had a ransomware. That's the most recent thing I've heard of. How would you normally tackle something like that? Because they were out for, I think, 3 weeks.
Yeah, and that's an that's an excellent question, first of all. And that is kind of where, now again, not knowing the specifics, it's hard to speak, but that is where I often tell people the reason why you buy cyber is again, it's insurance at the end of the day, but it's a little bit different from the sense that, you have property insurance, lightning strikes your property, it's damaged, insurance comes in and repairs. Cyber ransomware attack, insurance comes in and repairs it. However, what's different is when something physically happens to your business, inherently, you know what the process is. You know what to do. You've got to call a contractor. You got to do this thing. You got to call the fire department. You got to get somebody involved to help mitigate any kind of damage. What the interesting thing is, I think the biggest value of cyber insurance is that it gives you that kind of direction for those kinds of events. So, I did a presentation in Dallas one time, and the overwhelming consensus of people who didn't buy cyber said, well, if I come in, my system's locked up and there's a ransom note asking for me to pay money to get my data back, I'm going to call the police. I'm going to call the feds. You could do that, but again, how do you mitigate and remediate what just happened? So, that's where the insurance provides the most value. So, in a scenario like that, where you come in, ransom note says, please, pay X amount of dollars to get your data back, you notify the insurance company. The insurance company then notifies what's called a breach coach. And a breach coach basically is a lawyer that's going to act on the business's behalf. And and what that lawyer does is say, okay, and they kind of quarterback the incident at that point. So they say, all right, it's ransomware, you're locked up. One, we need to bring in forensics. So we got to figure out where it's affecting your system, where you were shut down. Two, we got to also figure out what data was taken. Was it everything you have, or did you have proper segregation of controls? Were servers taken offline at night and stuff like that? So they may only have a piece of your data. So let's look at what exactly was affected. And then three, how do we figure out, what to do at that point from, can we get you back up and running quickly while we deal with this incident, or are you shut down completely? And then, one value add of the of cyber insurance too is a lot of these incident response firms, forensic firms and stuff, they actually have experience dealing with very specific threat actors. And so maybe they know, hey, this is a, this is a criminal element that, doesn't really destroy the data. They'll just, use it for various nefarious purposes. They give it back, or let's try to figure out how to not pay and not do this stuff. So of course, I personally believe that we should never be paying ransoms because it just kind of perpetrates the crime over and over. And so, that's kind of the way to mitigate it is to, have the response there be as soon as it possibly get in. Now, to answer a larger question of how do I prevent it or how do I stop it from happening in the first place, that's all around what we call cyber hygiene, the controls you have in place. So there are various things. A lot of times, ransomware events are triggered by social engineering campaigns. So you've all seen those emails, those bogus emails. Well, in a lot of businesses, it's not exactly, a misspelled email from the Prince of Nigeria asking you to click on this link. They can be very sophisticated, and the use of artificial intelligence lately, you could have a video or even a video chat pop up or an email sent that legitimately looks like somebody within your organization. Well, once they click on it, that lets the threat actor inside. So that's kind of how they get in the first place from in most cases. The ways to sort of mitigate that, you might hear the term multi-factor authentication. So, is there two ways to sign into the network? That way, if somebody clicks on that link, there's an immediate identification of who the threat actor might be. They have to verify from another area how to get in. You might have that at your schools and stuff. Um, I would say that for the most part, there's no one silver bullet to stop it, which is why it's running rampant. But all these little controls, multi-factor authentication, taking your servers offline at night, providing data backups on a daily basis, that helps severely mitigate it. Now, there are tools in technology today. I'm thinking things like, the detection tools, EDR, XDR, MDR, managed detection tools that you might hear, where they act as like a fire alarm, basically. So if a bad actor, or let's just say an unwanted actor, tries to come in the door, the alarm goes off, shuts them down, reissues login credentials for everybody. So, so our tools to help stop those unfortunate events are getting better on a daily basis. However, it's never going to be complete where we're going to just eradicate it, if that makes sense. Does that kind of answer? I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, sir, it does, definitely. If I could ask a follow-up question, do
Please.
you think, for example, the company I work for, do you think, I know sometimes as a company you want to have your employee accessible 24/7. Do you think encouraging their employees to download, say, Teams or Outlook or stuff like that onto their personal computer that is less secured, a good way to go? Or
So that's tricky. So sometimes, so that again, that is actually a very good follow-up question. What I say about that is that, it's not really in this just one man's opinion and from experience, is that, it's not always good to be able to download, work onto personal computers without the proper like a VPN and stuff. So you see those virtual private networks. Like for a lot of organizations, you are free to download work-related apps, but usually there's an app associated with your organization or a virtual private network that'll make you more secure. It's not wise to just have the direct open air, I guess, open flow communication between work and personal computers. So it's always been, my preference that they are segregated as much as possible. But again, if you like, in order to get access to the Microsoft Teams related to your work organization, we say things like, well, maybe if you're downloading Teams with work, secure it with a virtual private network. Everybody has kind of seen them. A lot of times that's where stuff being done off hours, stuff being done, with where an employee just might not be thinking, they're trying to do 10 things at home, make dinner with the kids or whatever, and they just click on something because it looks official, and then that leads to uh, greater issues. Your work email too is most likely secured with phishing alerts and some of those, like I said, some of those alarm bells. And so if you're going direct to your, personal email, or things are just flowing through your personal email, it may not be quite as secure as your work, as you might be in the office. So not a good idea, but I know, I'm very cognizant of costs and stuff, so I know people are doing it. That's why I say it's always best to make sure it's being secured by some sort of virtual private network.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yes, sir. No, thank you. Excellent questions.
Yeah. Do you
Um,
have any kind of examples or any anecdotes without naming company names of perhaps some things that have stood out in your career with regard to cyber and risk?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a lot of them. So, and you read about a number of them in the news, and I would say that one of the things that always surprises me is that despite what you're hearing, despite everything that's happening in this world, um, companies continue to be unprotected for these sort of events, or really just don't have an idea of even what to do when an event happens. There was a large healthcare breach recently from an organization that manages, you know, billions of records. And some of those basic things like VPN, MFA, and all this stuff, that they were either not being conducted properly, or they were being missed in their in entirety. And so it's really can be kind of scary sometimes to see stuff like that. On the flip side, I will tell you that some of our more advanced controls and our tools have really helped mitigate events from happening. I had an insured that was very well advanced from, a technical perspective. They had, the latest early warning tools, the XDR tools, and you know, uh, a threat actor overseas in Russia tried to hack their system at 2 o'clock in the morning. Usually, a lot of these events happen at an off-hour time, and the alarm bells went off. They stopped the attack from happening. They changed their server position, so they were no longer visible to the threat actor. They canceled everybody's credentials and issued new ones. And so by the time the employees came in at 7 o'clock in the morning, they were basically back up and running. It was a little annoying for those people because in the first 15 minutes they had to change their password and then had to change their password on their iPhones and what have you not related to their work function apps. But that was it. And so that's kind of the model that you're starting to see and you're starting to see going forward. One other thing that we may not have a lot of color on when you see these things happen in the news is the amount of attacks that come either from a nation state or on behalf of a nation state. There are several countries out there where cybercrime actually, you know, is so prevalent it's in the top five of the nation's GDP. So, like I can think of several examples of that where, there's so much cybercrime happening that, it's actually listed. If you go into some of the national affairs archives on various countries, you will actually see that these criminal enterprises make up a significant amount. And of course, my favorite is we do a lot of work in reporting these events and working with federal officials both here and in the UK. Occasionally, we get information on when some of these criminal gangs are busted, and some of them are so sophisticated, they've even had their own call centers. Their call centers had HR, they had employee manuals. There was one that even had an employee assistance hotline. So if you had an issue that you needed to discuss with somebody, whether it was a mental health issue, an issue with another employee, you could call it. So it goes to show you that, when somebody says, well, why can't we just stop this? Well, it's like everything else from a criminal element perspective, and some of it's quite sophisticated. And, I'm not painting any countries specifically, but some of them kind of give a little wink and a nod that, and they actually sort of welcome it, especially attacking Western faced businesses and stuff like that. And what's interesting too is you'll note that anytime geopolitical events turn one way, that changes the landscape of the cyber attack.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, yes, I'm sure we can all imagine on that. One of the questions I had is, and I'm sure a lot of the students have is, what kind of careers are you seeing, pop up either through AI or just in general at, at your position? What, if anybody on the call today is interested in going into cyber risk, what would you recommend or what do you see the trends going towards?
Well, I definitely would tell you that so I work with a lot of privately held companies. I work with publicly traded companies as well. One common theme is you're starting to see a significant investment in this side. So as we move to a legal landscape, that third party piece of the coverage that I didn't really talk about, but as we move to that legal landscape where, there's breach, all 50 states now, there were a couple of holdouts for many years, but all 50 states have breach notification laws. So if something happens, your network is compromised, by law, you have X amount of time to report it. So as we move into that world where it becomes almost, well, A, it's irresponsible to not safeguard people's information, but B, it becomes a reputational issue where if we don't safeguard people's information, if we don't keep this, think about the bad press related to a data breach and um, and it really does affect the bottom line. So don't always think that like, oh yeah, Marriott's been hit a number of times, Hilton, whoever, that those organizations don't suffer from that particular event. It's quite the opposite. They suffer greatly. So you're seeing a heavy investment on the security side from a technology perspective. There is a significant influence of, or I'm sorry, there's a significant influence from, managed service providers and the like who are investing heavily on the security pieces. On the insurance side, also, the market is still relatively young. So I would tell you if anybody is following in the steps of wanting to go into insurance, there is a very high demand for quality people in the cyber insurance and technology professional space. And I say that because I just saw an estimate. So right now, we're small and young from the insurance perspective. So I told you I was an intern in cyber insurance. I'm not going to say when that was. I'm sure it was before a lot of people were born here on this call, but it is what it is. But but I've been in the business 22 years. I'll just say that. And I'm 45, by the way. I'm not shy about that. But uh, that was when the industry started. Now, if you've done other lines of coverage, you may know that fire insurance, goes back to like the 12th century, and there was various vehicles of that. So we are the babies of insurance. Now, there are some more emerging like terrorism, political risk, some of these other things that are being thought of now that might be slightly younger than cyber, but we're a $14 billion piece of the insurance world. So we're tiny. Um, the estimate is that by 2030 to 2033, we should be at about $75 billion. So every time there's a massive data breach, every time there's a turn of events in this world, risk managers, CISOs, whoever they are at these organizations are thinking, I've got to buy insurance. I got to look at insurance. Which is why, I do highly recommend that. And if anybody is interested, feel free to reach out. I could walk you through what the day in the life of an underwriter would look like on this space. And so yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous demand and a tremendous upside. And look, I don't, I will tell you right now that a lot of people, especially in my space on the insurance side, come from all backgrounds. Some are from finance, some are from technology, some are from, more of a general risk frame. And they all, everything is okay. There's educational tools, there's various industry designations, there's plenty of information out there. I'm, looking to get into a doctoral program myself. So it just keeps on going. And that's the exciting thing too, is that my world, the cyber insurance world specifically, you can never stop learning. So something is always different. There's been a lot of days where I've woken up to, if I'm just going to be bluntly honest, I've woken up and said, "Wow, I didn't see that one coming today." So I say that a lot, and that's what makes it kind of exciting.
Absolutely.
In
We
my
have a
world.
question by,
Sure.
I'm sorry, is it Easel or?
Easily, yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Awesome. So,
Oh, I am muted. I think I
there we
muted
go.
you.
Oh,
Showing
there we
that.
go. Are we good now?
I was trying
Great.
to lower your hand, but yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Lawrence, you briefly touched on how all 50 states all have like trigger laws or something like that, but like recently Philadelphia insurance, they had an outage that wasn't really linked to ransomware. So my question is like when an attack disables operations without triggering ransomware or like data theft or anything, like what's your take on how coverage and claims handling needs to evolve?
Yeah, great question. And it's so let me be clear. The 50 state laws are merely a breach of any sort. So it doesn't have to be ransomware, it could be a brute force attack. It could very well just be, the other element that is often not discussed in the cybersecurity world is the human element. For years, I don't know if you've heard the stories, but for years It was just, oh, this executive left his laptop somewhere. Um, I will tell you what was funny is, growing up in this space, one of my mentors, I've always like I've loved learning from her. We kind of grew up in the business figuring things out as cyber happened, but she was a she was a prominent offender of leaving her laptop at Newark Airport, despite the fact being a leader in the cyber, insurance industry. So it's just funny what can happen from a human element perspective. But addressing directly like what happens at an organization, the laws are they're very clear in the sense that if a breach occurs, no matter how it's triggered or whatever, if there is the possibility of anybody's information being compromised, it should be disclosed, right? So all the customers should know about it, all that stuff, just in case. Now, you don't always have to go far. If it was determined from a threat perspective that no personally identifiable information was ever in danger. So that laptop she left, while I joke about that it's kind of funny that, somebody in the cyberspace would keep repeatedly doing that, our laptops are encrypted, right? So it would be very hard for somebody to break that and get into the actual sensitive contents of it. So in some of those cases, you hear it being reported, but you may be concerned, like, well, why am I not seeing any actions individually? Well, maybe no information was compromised, but the reporting is very strict and it has to be there regardless of what the actual event that triggered that reporting is. So that's why you may not have seen actions per se, but Philly was so this recent situation Philadelphia was in. That is what I was talking about, like one of those events that's just kind of spreading from industry to industry. And it hit the insurance industry for a while. It wasn't just Philly. There was probably about 7 or 8 higher profile names that you might have read about, who were affected by this, and then it morphed from there. They moved to airlines, and they started in retail with that particular operation, going after large scale retail organizations. And one other thing to note is that it's not just those large multinationals that are required to report this information. If you're door dashing a pizza tonight or going out to dinner, those small businesses, a lot of them are subject to the same regulations from a notification perspective. Um, so that's why I'm saying like there's a lot of emphasis on it right now, but really it's why you might know about it but not of it's because it was determined that there was no threat to your particular data.
Great. We have another question.
Please, I love it.
Hello. Yeah, since cyber insurance is relatively new in the market, could you talk a little bit about how coverage limits and premiums have changed?
That's that's phenomenal. If you've ever seen if you ever have seen a chart of the stock market from like 1927 and on, that's kind of how cyber insurance has been. And actuaries have hated it until very recently because there was no credibility in the data. So it started out, we basically were underwriting based on rates that were developed off of, either some carriers, it was professional liability models. Some carriers, believe it or not, there was direct correlation into how they priced earthquake insurance. So it was very erratic. You'd have one market quoting the same one risk at $10,000. The very same risk goes to another market and they quote it at $2,000. So for many years, for the first 10 to 12 years of this industry, there was very little consensus in pricing. There was no standardized pricing, none of that stuff, and there still really isn't that today. Um, but I think what had happened was right around the actual physical pandemic, we had a real big ransomware pandemic, the 2019, 2020, 2021 phase. And as a lot of companies went remote, and a lot of them weren't really prepared to understand all their risks at going remote. And the criminal element was very good at breaching risk at that time. And so what you found is all of a sudden the actuaries were saying, no, no, none of this is making money and none of this is working and the rates are way too low. And that usual carrier competition that you have where one risk is fighting or one carrier is fighting with another over the rates was not going to work because everybody's rates were, excuse me, but in the toilet. And so we bottomed out like 2019, and then in like 2021, it accelerated beyond what you would normally see. So it went from, at the very bottom, then it went up and we were renewing we were risks in 2022. I had one risk in particular. It was a larger organization, not typical of what we underwrite, but the expiring premium was like $200,000 because it's a big organization, nationwide, national footprint. We renewed it with no competition. So the broker did not even bother taking it to market because we renewed it at $1.2 million in premium. And that was 10 times cheaper than anything they would have gotten had they gone to the market. So then the rates went up like that. Now, in the last 18 months, the industry has kind of said, well, we took a lot of, we might have overcorrected. So now you're seeing the rates come back down again. But there's really not been kind of a bottom out. So I would say the answer to your question is they've been really all over the map as it's been indicated. And to this day, there's still a lot of turbulence.
Great question.
Yeah, that was a really good one. We
Yeah,
get that.
very good.
That was an advanced one. We get that one a lot. A lot of insurance people.
Yes, someone thinking through insurance. Any other questions? Okay, well, I have a couple.
Sure.
So what are your well, I think, well, from what I've heard so far, obviously VPN, probably turning off your computer or not being having it in the network all night, right? I have
Yeah.
heard, by the way, I've scared myself once. I got that ping at 3 a.m. like ding, like someone was on my computer, my work, and I was like, what was going on? I woke
Yeah.
up. So I
Yeah.
think that's scary. So yeah, definitely don't be on the computer if you're not on it, especially your work one. Log off, shut it down, VPNs, all that. But is there anything else that either, I'm sure interns feel like, oh, I'm not a leader, right? These are the people leading it. But I think I would challenge that and say anyone can be a leader in your respective company by asking questions or, coming up with great solutions. So are there any suggestions that either you do on your personal life that maybe most people don't to take extra precautions or anything that people should be asking of their company to make sure that their information is protected?
Well, I'll address the personal one first, but I'm of course a weirdo, so it's going to be a little bit different for most people. But one thing I do personally is and I'm not overly like don't worry. Like if you ever visited me, it's not like I live in a bunker and there's no internet access or anything. But the one thing I don't do is I don't use, it's going to be painful for some people. I currently don't use things like Venmo or stuff like that where there's direct tie to your bank account. I don't use debit cards at all. Um, it's been my experience that anything in your personal lives where, you need where it's tied to your bank account, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to recover funds that have been lost from your bank account than it is from the credit card companies, because the credit card companies are kind of built for that kind of fraud. They have very extensive, I work with a lot of them. They have great fraud prevention units. Um, and so, and by the way, it's not to simplify or sound crass, but it's no harm, no foul, right? Nothing's touching your bank account. You find an unusual transaction, you just, dispute it and report it. If you're using your debit card, your unusual transaction is oh crap, $500 from a bank account is gone. And that becomes a lot harder of an issue to replace. So personally, I would say that's one thing. Now I know that's a little extreme, and people are using Venmo and all that stuff, and there are some safeguards there, but like I don't do that stuff. Now, um, professionally, the Trojan horse is the human element. So you talk about leadership and what to do. What I would tell you is it really stems from what you're doing, paying attention to what you're doing. So when you get an email, one, if you work in any kind of financial function, so if there's anything you're dealing with, any kind of transactions of your business, anytime something comes to you and says, we want to get paid or we want to pay you, but you have to change to this account. Send the funds here. Do this, something that changes up your normal process. Definitely stop and definitely question it. And I mean, I'm talking, there have been very sophisticated people who have gone through schooling, gone through years, and have had a vendor in air quotes, I say, come to them and say, you know, we're moving our financial operations to this platform. Please pay us here. And they just do it without questioning. And then next thing you know, the actual vendor calls and says, hey, uh, we've never gotten paid. And next thing you know, you're out X amount of dollars. Hackers have it. A lot of times, those financial crimes can be untraceable. So I would say always question it. Now, if you're not in a finance function, one element I got to tell you is always look at your email and make sure email addresses are coming from the right person, right address, right everything. If anything is off to you, stop and question it because, again, I mean, there's people in the cyber insurance field who have triggered, massive data breaches just by getting busy and doing stuff. So that really simply, because Daniel, there's a lot of tools out there, but none of them work if the human element behind the screen is not, doing what they can to protect it. I mean, look, simply put, if the CIA and in the UK, if MI5 could suffer some of these, data leakages or breaches or disclosures of things people couldn't, then anybody's susceptible. Because if I think it would be hard to say, that they don't have tip-top cybersecurity. So those are what I would do in your day to day.
Yeah, good points. We have a couple questions in the chat. I think we've addressed the first one to Shar, but Jacob has a question as to have there been any big threats caused by AI database leaks, I guess, because the AI is collecting so much data, I guess is the context. So, is there, well, obviously there are threats there, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there has been, one of the things a lot of people struggle with. So you get these little notes saying you can opt out of things. So you don't want your list, whatever. But the issue is if that list was AI generated or AI learned something, it can't unlearn what it already learned. So one of the biggest threats with AI is once it's out there, it's out there. There's nothing you can do to take it back at this point, right? So some of these breaches now are starting to occur where people have physically said, I don't want my data to be a part of this. They check the box, and then all of a sudden there's a loss of their data, and they're like, what happened? Well, AI can't unlearn what it already learned. So that from an individual and a corporate perspective is one of the bigger threats with AI. Um, AI is coming in mostly right now with manipulating and changing the sophistication of the attack threats, the threat vectors that we see out there. So, like I said, those social engineering claims, those emails where it used to be, haha, yeah, sure, the Prince of Nigeria wants to, if I pay them $5,000, they'll give me $10 million tomorrow. Like, all those things that people just don't fall for anymore. But, I had one come through that was written by my CEO, and the AI, the artificial intelligence tools that the threat actor was actually using was trying to understand the vernacular of my CEO. So if a CEO uses a catchphrase, or if somebody in your office uses a catchphrase or whatever, it actually appears in the email. And now the emails don't look fabricated. And sometimes AI is even helping the hackers sort of hijack some of the IP where it actually is a legitimate email being sent from your organization, but you click on the link and it goes somewhere else. So AI's biggest threat right now, again, other than that one where we are seeing breaches where, hey, I left my data, I said not to include it, but now you got hacked and it was included. um, you know, it's really how it's enhanced the threats going forward. Now, the flip side is on the defensive side, we are also using AI to repel that. So just like they're learning all the offensive behaviors, like how to manipulate offensive behaviors, we're using AI to say, all right, this is what you're doing, and you're probably using this tool to do this. So it's making both sides a little bit stronger. But the biggest threat right now is really in that AI is changing the landscape of how claims are coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself a pretty smart person, but I think recently I got a text I live in Florida, so there's tolls everywhere. Got a text about my toll, clicked on it, and it looked exactly legitimate. But later on, I saw the American Express come through, and it was like a different website. And then my American Express had been tampered, right? So thankfully, like you said, Amex covers it, but I was like, oh, they got me.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Well,
and it was for like
that,
$20 or something stupid, but
yeah, but that's what they call phishing, I mean, and a lot of times it's just that. On the personal side, any of you have parents, grandparents, whatever, that are,
yeah,
up there in years. I remember my father, who, once he got out of the Marine Corps and stuff, never really traveled like internet. He never went international after the Marine Corps, but he still won the lottery in St. Croix one time. It's just stroke of luck. He won $5 million in St. Croix, even though I'm not sure, the Virgin Islands, and I'm not sure he even knew where that was, but he won the lottery there.
hey, you
So
didn't have to be a resident.
yeah, hey, why not? But that's my point, is that, like,
Yeah,
and that was back in the early days too, when you'd get a phone call saying like, hey, this happened, just give me your bank account, and we'll send the funds over tonight. But now it's gotten sophisticated. And I also got that toll one for North Carolina because, like I said, I kind of ping pong back and forth.
yeah.
And I gotta say, the North Carolina one, though, I mean, maybe it was just me, but I saw that link and I'm like, no dice, bud. Like, this isn't, so
So we have a couple more questions. Is it Uday Ud Uday Kumar? Do you mind unmuting so you can clarify the question for me? I think the question is something, but the difference between cyber technology profession and cyber risk profession, what kind of different knowledge is required to perform daily tasks?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when you're looking at a career on the insurance side, so the cyber insurance world, it often gets interchanged with technology professional liability. So, just think of that if you've had, hey, Daniel, has there been anybody talking about E&O coverages? Have they gone through stuff with E&O, errors and emissions?
I think so. Yes, I believe so. Been a couple of.
Yeah, so E&O is so the technology piece of what I do is basically an errors and emissions coverage for technology companies. So I actually physically underwrite the AI company to buy insurance for themselves. And that includes cyber. So a lot of times, because it's very hard to distinguish, where like so when a breach occurs, it's like, well, is it cyber or is it tech professional? So if you're a technology firm and you cause a breach at one of your clients, that often is a technology professional exposure. Whereas, if you're a um, if you're a manufacturer and you hired me and I of course walked out with a laptop and spilled data all over the internet, that's a cyber loss. So there's a very fine line in what they do, but basically an underwriter who does cyber is also generally doing technology. There are some companies that segregate it out, but it's very important to learn both because the cyber insurance market is very demanding for you to look at both that manufacturer as well as that software company. So again, the cyber component doesn't change, but the professional service does.
Absolutely. And then, um, Ashar, do you mind unmuting yourself? I'm not understanding the question, and maybe you can clarify that for us.
Hello, I was just asking if you know those random numbers we see, like the one you mentioned earlier, the toll tag and the others. I was
Yeah.
just wondering, like, how do they get that information if we've never, spoken to them? Like what are
How
some
do you
triggers that
your
makes these
phone
cyber
number?
attacks happen?
Yeah, it's
Gotcha.
it's honestly it's they call it phishing, the PH phishing. It's they, find your customer lists online, your phone number, random places. There's all kinds of programs that'll just dial random numbers and get to you. And so it's a very, it's a very random, but also, can be potentially dangerous type situation. Um, but yeah, a lot of times and that's the thing too, especially when you talk to people who are, well, let's just say more elder than me. They feel like they're not a target, not going to be targeted. They haven't pissed anyone off. But a lot of these situations, you are not really the specific target. It's, it's we'll find one in a mil if one in a million responds to this, then we're good. That paid for itself. They just have to find those people. And so, like I said, they're doing it through a whole host and number of means, but a lot of times it's magically they've either got somebody's public information list. You can go online. Um, uh, you can go online and look up tax record, whatever it is. There's a lot of public information out there, and that's just how they're contacting you.
Yeah, exactly. So I know at least for me, like my phone number is not Florida based, so I know they got my phone number from they knew for some reason that it wasn't me, like you said, it was like all of Floridians.
Yeah.
Must have gotten some sort of bulk, information from all Floridians that, and they went after them.
I mean,
But
no offense, but the government is not
of course, yeah,
ever the best
the best at
safeguards.
everything.
So like they could just
Right.
be getting these DMV lists, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And we should just, I think moving forward, you should just proceed as if your information is out there, right? So how are you going to protect yourself? Either through identity theft protection, because you are still liable for that stuff,
Yeah.
personally, or just proceed as if all your information is out there. And for some of us, it is because we are public, right? And we have our numbers publicly facing and things like that. So you just have to make sure that you're always protecting yourself. Cool. Well, I think we have time for one last question, if anybody has that final. And we appreciate your time.
Uh, I don't know if anyone already raised their hand or something. I have a
Go ahead.
question. Do you think in regards to phishing or being able, these hackers or individuals being able to access our information, do you think it's also being done through companies selling our information, say when we sign up for rewards programs or stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean it has that's a great question. It has occurred. The danger about selling your list to the data brokers is just that, where it's like, well, what if somebody hacks the data brokers? What if somebody gets a hold of their, the information, the list that they hold? So that does become, a prevalent issue. It has happened, but saying, you shut down data brokers, they're not allowed. And some of you who live in states like California and stuff, they've already taken a lot of steps to limit the information or the transfer of data. It still hasn't seemed to stop this stuff from happening. But yes, that definitely is a case. And you bring up the very last thing I would say personally is like when you're transacting business and you're putting information out there, just have an understanding as to where it's going, why it's going there, and who might be doing what with it to the extent that you can. There's practicality is if you're signing up for a mortgage or a car loan or something, you know, you click the disclosures, you can only share with who you need to share, but there's a shot that a third party from there on, but you can't swear off doing that because you still have to buy that car, you still have to buy that house. So to the extent that you can limit the transfer of data, I'd say do it, but it's really not going to completely make that stuff go away. But that's a good, that is an area that does get targeted.
Absolutely. I think it's a good
Thank
practice
you.
to now have several emails, right? If you do have those reward programs,
Yeah.
put them all in one email. Your bank information should always have a different email, just kind of don't have that information out there. So thank you so much, Lawrence, Larry, Baldino.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. Hopefully we got some good tips and tricks, and we'll see you all next week. You have a great one.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.